My family filed false CPS reports claiming I was mentally unfit to parent, but they didn't expect the social worker to expose their lies in court. I know that sounds like something straight out of a TV drama, but this is my real life. And it all started with something so small, so ordinary, that I never could have imagined it spiraling into this. I'm 25 years old, and at the time this all began, I was 26 weeks pregnant with my first child. I should have been glowing, focused on decorating the nursery, folding tiny onesies, and arguing with my husband about whether we needed a wipe warmer. Instead, I was caught in a war with my own family over a baby name. I'm Emily. My husband's name is Ryan. He's 28. We've been together for 4 years and married for 2. And when we found out we were expecting a baby girl, it felt like the happiest moment of our lives. We spent weeks curled up together on the couch, flipping through baby name books, scrolling endless lists on the internet, debating the pros and cons of each possibility. Eventually, we landed on the name Sophia Grace. Sophia, because we both loved how it struck a balance, classic, timeless, but still modern enough that our daughter wouldn't feel like she was stuck with something outdated. And Grace, after Ryan's late aunt who practically raised him when his parents separated. It was meaningful. It was beautiful. And most importantly, it was ours. We announced the name to both of our families about a month later. And that's when everything went sideways. My mom, Margaret, 60 years old, has always been obsessed with family traditions. She comes from this huge Irish Catholic family where names are passed down like heirlooms, generation after generation. When we told her about Sophia Grace, her face completely changed. She didn't smile. She didn't say, "Oh, that's lovely." She just stared for a few seconds before asking, very pointedly, if we had considered naming the baby Eleanor, after my grandmother. Now, here's where the story takes a darker turn. Everyone in my family talks about my grandmother Eleanor like she was this saint, the matriarch who kept everyone together, this sweet old lady who baked cookies and knitted sweaters. But my memories are very different. Growing up, Eleanor babysat me and my younger brother Liam almost every weekend from when I was 7 until I was about 16. And let me tell you, she was not the kind, gentle grandmother everyone remembers. She was strict to the point of cruelty. If Liam or I so much as whispered while she was watching her soap operas, she'd lock us in the basement pantry. Not for a few minutes as a timeout. For hours. The pantry was pitch dark. It smelled like rotten vegetables. There were no windows, and the heavy door made you feel like you were sealed inside a tomb. Liam was younger than me, so of course he cried, and that only made Eleanor angrier when she finally let us out. Food was another weapon for her. If we asked for a snack, if we squirmed in our seats during her shows, she'd send us to bed hungry. And she always convinced our parents that we had eaten plenty, that we were just greedy kids trying to manipulate them. But honestly, the worst part wasn't even the punishments. It was the words. The things she drilled into us when no one else was around. She called Liam stupid because he struggled with reading. She told me I was getting fat and that no boy would ever want to marry me. I can still hear her voice in my head when I look in the mirror sometimes. And yet, when she moved into assisted living later in life, the whole family acted like she was some kind of angel. They'd gush over her, share stories about her wisdom, about her kindness. I'd sit there quietly, biting my tongue, knowing that if I ever spoke up about what she really did to us, nobody would believe me. When she passed away, my mother practically canonized her. She even tattooed Eleanor's name on her wrist in flowing cursive. Every holiday, she posts old photos of Eleanor online with captions like, "Missing your guidance every day." So when my mom suggested naming my baby after her? Absolutely not. I shut that down immediately. I told her that Ryan and I had chosen Sophia Grace, and that was final. Her reaction? Cold. Hardened. She said it would be selfish of me not to honor Eleanor's memory. That Eleanor would have wanted her great-granddaughter to carry her name. And from that moment on, it was like she made it her mission to break me down. Every phone call, every text, every visit. Somehow, the conversation always circled back to Eleanor. She sent me old photos, family anecdotes, anything she could think of to guilt me into changing my mind. At first, my dad stayed quiet. Charles, he's 56, doesn't usually get involved in family drama. But eventually, even he started chiming in. He'd lecture me about respecting our elders, about honoring family ties. He reminded me that Eleanor had left me jewelry when she passed away, as if that meant she and I had this special bond. What he didn't know is that she left jewelry to every granddaughter. It wasn't special. It was a gesture to keep up appearances. And then came the baby shower. My mom planned the whole thing at our local community center. About 30 people showed up, cousins, aunts, co-workers, friends. For the first hour, it was great. I thought maybe, just maybe, things would stay civil. But then my mom stood up to give a speech. She thanked everyone for coming. She said how excited she was to be a grandmother. And then she dropped the bomb. She asked everyone there to join her in convincing me to choose a more traditional name. She said Eleanor had been the heart of our family, and it would mean the world to her if the name lived on through her great-granddaughter. I looked around the room, and people were nodding. My cousin Julia even piped up that Eleanor would have loved to know a baby carried her name. That's when I snapped. I stood up and said, as firmly as I could, that the baby's name was Sophia Grace. Not Eleanor. Not negotiable. Period. My mom's smile dropped instantly. She accused me of being stubborn, selfish, disrespectful. She said Eleanor had sacrificed so much for our family, and that this was the least I could do. Her voice got louder and sharper until the whole room went dead silent. My baby shower had turned into a public argument over a dead woman's name. I was humiliated. People were whispering. Some left early. A few came up afterward and quietly told me they understood. But most just told me to work it out with my mom. After that, things only got worse. My mom called me multiple times a day to bring it up. My dad started showing up at my house when Ryan wasn't home, lecturing me about loyalty and tradition. My brother Liam even texted me, begging me to just give in for the sake of peace, because the stress wasn't worth it. And then there was my Aunt Teresa. She cornered me during my lunch break at work one day, telling me how devastated my mom was, and how Eleanor had always been so proud of me. When I told her Eleanor was cruel to me as a child, Teresa brushed it off, said I was probably misremembering because I'd been so young. That's the thing that cut the deepest. Nobody in my family would listen to me. They'd change the subject, tell me to focus on the good memories, or lecture me about not judging Eleanor by modern standards. And then came the doctor's appointment. My mom showed up uninvited. And she brought someone with her. Eleanor's sister, Beatrice. 78 years old. Drove 3 hours just to be there. My mom said it would be meaningful for Beatrice to hear her great-great-niece's heartbeat. Especially since she thought the baby might be named Eleanor, except I had never said that. My mom had lied to her, made it seem like we were still discussing it. I was furious. I left the appointment without letting anyone hear the heartbeat. I called Ryan in tears, and he told me we needed to set boundaries. Maybe even put it in writing. But here's the thing. At that point, I realized this wasn't about a name anymore. To my family, it had become a test. A way to measure whether I respected their traditions, or if I was going to betray them. And I knew if I caved now, I'd be caving forever. Still, the pressure was relentless. My due date was 12 weeks away, and instead of feeling excited, I felt trapped, stressed, alone. That's where part 1 of this story ends. But trust me, it only gets more intense from here. When I left that doctor's appointment, driving home with tears blurring the road in front of me, something inside me snapped. For weeks, I had been telling myself that maybe, just maybe, this storm would calm down. That, once my parents realized how serious Ryan and I were about our decision, they'd back off and accept it. But that day, when my mom ambushed me with Eleanor's sister, Beatrice, I knew this wasn't just about a name anymore. This was a battle for control. A battle over my autonomy as a woman, as a daughter, and now as a mother. And I wasn't about to lose. Ryan was furious when I told him what happened. He immediately suggested drafting a letter, something formal, something that would spell out in black and white that Sophia Grace was our daughter's name, and that our family needed to respect that. He wanted to draw a clear line, but I hesitated. On one hand, I craved that sense of control, that boundary. On the other, I knew my parents would see it as an act of war. A letter would escalate things, and part of me still clung to the hope that they'd eventually calm down if I just held firm without throwing more fuel on the fire. Spoiler. I was wrong. In the weeks after the baby shower, the situation grew unbearable. My mom called me constantly, sometimes 5 or 6 times a day. If I didn't answer, she'd leave long voicemails, dripping with guilt trips about how Eleanor had been the backbone of our family, and how I was erasing her legacy. My dad started showing up at my house unannounced, usually when Ryan was at work. He'd sit at my kitchen table with his coffee, lecturing me about loyalty and tradition. He said things like, "One day, you'll understand that family comes before personal preference." And then there was Liam, my little brother. He's 22, and he texted me one afternoon saying, "Emily, just give them what they want. It's not worth the stress. You're pregnant. This isn't good for you or the baby." In one of the journeying presents, and made adjourning presents, to be workly and again to repent her, I read his message over and over, torn between anger and heartbreak. Liam and I had been through the same hell with Eleanor as kids. He had cried in that dark basement pantry with me. He had been called stupid by the same woman. How could he, of all people, be telling me to honor her name? But the truth is, Liam has always been the peacemaker. The one who would rather give in than fight. And I realized then that in my family, peace only ever came when someone surrendered to my mother's will. I wasn't going to be that person anymore. Still, I was exhausted. Every day felt like a new confrontation, a new attempt to wear me down. And then came the hospital incident. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I went into early labor at just 35 weeks. Ryan rushed me to the hospital, my heart pounding with fear. But by some miracle, our daughter was born healthy. Tiny, just 5 pounds 3 ounces, but strong. Holding her for the first time was the most surreal moment of my life. She was real. She was mine. Sophia Grace. The name rolled off my tongue like a prayer as I whispered it to her. For that first day, I almost forgot about my family. Ryan and I were exhausted, but we were floating in a bubble of pure joy. But that bubble burst quickly. On the second day, a nurse came into my room looking a little uneasy. She told me that several people had been calling the hospital, asking about me and the baby, my mom, my dad, my Aunt Teresa, even my cousin Julia. They wanted updates on Sophia's health. Visiting hours, which room we were in. The nurse said she hadn't given them any information, but I felt my chest tighten with dread. I hadn't told any of them I was in labor. I wanted peace. I wanted time to bond with my baby before the inevitable chaos. That afternoon, my parents showed up anyway. They somehow figured out which room I was in, and barged in like they owned the place. I was sitting in bed, trying to breastfeed Sophia, when my mom swooped in and went straight to her bassinet. She started snapping photos, cooing about how beautiful baby Eleanor was. My blood ran cold. I corrected her. Her name is Sophia Grace. My mom just chuckled, like I was joking. She said, "Oh, you'll come around. You'll see how perfect Eleanor is for her. She even looks just like her in baby pictures." Meanwhile, my dad positioned himself at the door like a guard, arms crossed, making it clear I wasn't getting rid of them easily. He said they were hurt, that I hadn't called them. That family should be the first to know about something this important. I was furious and terrified. I told them to leave. My mom refused. She scooped Sophia out of the bassinet without asking, and cradled her like she was hers. When I tried to take her back, she told me I was being possessive, and that grandparents had rights too. She said Eleanor would have wanted her to be involved in raising her great-granddaughter. At that exact moment, Ryan walked back into the room with a cup of coffee. His face went white when he saw what was happening. He demanded they leave. My mom argued. My dad glared. Ryan didn't back down. He told them flat out that they were violating our privacy, that this was our time as new parents, not theirs. When my mom still wouldn't hand Sophia back, Ryan took her firmly but carefully, and then told the nurse to call security. That's when my mom turned on him. She said Ryan was poisoning me against my family, that if he truly respected tradition, he'd support naming the baby Eleanor instead of pushing his own family's names. Ryan stood his ground until security arrived and escorted my parents out. But before leaving, my mom leaned close and hissed, "This isn't over. We will have a relationship with Eleanor, whether you like it or not." The next day, it got worse. A social worker named Miss Patel came into my hospital room. She explained that the hospital had received a call, someone claiming I was suffering from postpartum depression and wasn't fit to care for my baby. I felt my stomach drop. The caller had given specific details. That I was paranoid. That I was refusing to let my family see the baby. That Ryan was isolating me from the people who loved me. Miss Patel was kind but firm. She said she was required to do a wellness check. She asked me about my support system, my mental health history, my plans for caring for Sophia once we went home. She asked about my family, whether there was conflict. I told her everything. About the name. About the pressure. About my parents barging into the hospital. About how they wouldn't stop. She listened carefully, then told me she didn't see any signs of the problems described in the call. She said I seemed like a capable new mother dealing with normal family stress. Her report reflected that no further intervention was needed. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with rage, because I knew exactly who had made that call. When Sophia and I were discharged 2 days later, I thought maybe things would calm down once we were home. Ryan's sister Lauren even came to stay with us for a week, cooking meals, helping with chores, giving us time to focus on the baby. But 3 days in, my Aunt Teresa showed up at the door with my cousin Nathan and his wife Rachel. They claimed they were worried about me because I hadn't been answering my mom's calls. Ryan tried to block them at the door, but Teresa pushed past him. She said she needed to see for herself that Sophia was healthy. Nathan and Rachel followed, uninvited. They weren't visiting, they were investigating. Teresa marched upstairs, picked up Sophia, and started inspecting her like she was a doctor. Nathan took out his phone and began snapping photos of our nursery, our kitchen, even our living room. Rachel peppered me with questions about how often I fed Sophia, how much I slept, whether I was taking medication. It wasn't concern. It was evidence gathering. That night, at 2 in the morning, Ryan's mom Linda called him from another state. She told him she'd received a bizarre phone call from someone claiming to be my mom. The caller said I was suffering from severe postpartum depression, and begged Linda to convince Ryan to leave Sophia with my parents while I got treatment. That was the moment everything clicked. This wasn't just harassment. It was a coordinated attack, a campaign to paint me as an unfit mother, to strip me of my right to raise my daughter, to force Eleanor's ghost into Sophia's life whether I wanted it or not. And it wasn't going to stop on its own. That's where part 2 ends. The next chapter is when Ryan and I realize we need legal help and fast. After that night, after Ryan's mom Linda told us about the strange phone call from someone pretending to be my mother, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sophia was asleep in her bassinet beside me, her tiny breaths rising and falling. And all I could think was, they're trying to take her from me. That wasn't paranoia. It was reality. My family had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. What started as a fight about a baby name had mutated into something darker, more calculated. They weren't just harassing me anymore. They were spreading lies. They were calling social workers, doctors, even Ryan's employer. They were trying to build a case against me, a paper trail of fake concern that could eventually be used in court to prove I was unfit. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When people are willing to lie about you, you need to be ready with the truth. That's when Ryan said the words that would change everything. We need a lawyer. En this wees kan the laries. And the skristis of kontout bet to gastids. The next morning, with Sophia bundled up in her car seat, we drove to the office of Mr. Alvarez, a family law attorney who specialized in grandparents' rights disputes. He was calm, professional, the kind of man who's probably seen it all. And when we told him everything, every unannounced visit, every manipulative voicemail, every fake accusation, he didn't look shocked. He just nodded, took notes, and asked for specifics. He explained something I didn't know. In most states, grandparents don't have automatic legal rights. They can't just demand custody or visitation, unless they can prove one of two things. Either the parents are unfit, or there are extraordinary circumstances, like the death of one parent. That's when it hit me. All those phone calls, all those lies about postpartum depression, all those photos Nathan took of our house, they weren't random. They were an attempt to fabricate evidence that I wasn't capable of caring for Sophia. Mr. Alvarez warned us, even false reports to social services could have serious consequences. Even if they're proven wrong, the process itself could be invasive and traumatic. CPS doesn't just ignore allegations, they investigate. And that was exactly what my parents were counting on. He told us to start documenting everything. Every call, every visit, every voicemail. If my family showed up at the door, we were to write it down, time-stamped, with as much detail as possible. If they sent texts, we saved them. If they left voicemails, we recorded them. Paper beats rumor. And then he suggested the first step. A cease and desist letter. It wasn't as extreme as a restraining order, but it was official. It would tell my family, in no uncertain terms, that their behavior was harassment, and that if they didn't stop, legal consequences would follow. So we did it. We sent the letter to my parents, my Aunt Teresa, and my cousin Nathan. It laid out the boundaries. No more uninvited visits. No more contacting Ryan's family or workplace. No more false reports. I thought maybe that would be enough to scare them into stopping, but if anything, it made them angrier. 3 days later, my brother Liam called me. His voice was tight, almost pleading. Emily, Mom and Dad are devastated, he said. They feel like you're punishing them just for caring about you and Sophia. Why would you send them something like that? They're heartbroken. No, I swallowed the lump in my throat. Liam, they're not caring. They're lying. They've called CPS. They've called Ryan's job. They're trying to make me look unstable so they can take Sophia away. He paused, clearly blindsided. They told me they were just worried. They didn't say anything about CPS or work calls. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Liam didn't know the full extent of what was happening. Maybe, just maybe, he'd understand if I told him everything. So I did. I told him about the hospital social worker. I told him about Nathan taking photos of our house. I told him about the late-night phone call to Linda, begging her to convince Ryan to hand Sophia over. By the time I finished, Liam was quiet. Finally, he said, I didn't know any of that. They told me they just wanted to be part of Sophia's life. I almost cried with relief. Then tell them to back off, Liam. Tell them this isn't helping. I want them in my life. But not like this. He promised he'd talk to them. But the next day, I got a voicemail from my mom. Her voice was cold, detached. She said the legal letter proved I wasn't thinking clearly. That Ryan was manipulating me. That Eleanor would be heartbroken to know her great-granddaughter was being kept away from family who loved her. And then she said the words that chilled me to my core. We're not giving up. One way or another, Eleanor will have a relationship with her great-granddaughter. She didn't say Sophia. She didn't even acknowledge her real name. To her, my baby wasn't Sophia Grace. She was Eleanor. A living extension of a woman who had tormented me as a child. That voicemail made it clear. The letter hadn't solved anything. It had just exposed how far my family was willing to go. At this point, I was caught between fury and despair. Part of me wanted to scream, to fight, to burn every bridge just to protect my child. But another part of me, this small broken part, still hoped there was a way to fix things. Because here's the ugly truth about family. Even when they hurt you, even when they betray you, there's still that voice in the back of your head saying, maybe they'll change, maybe they'll love me enough to stop. But the more I hoped, the worse it got. And soon, the situation escalated to a place I never thought it would go. A courtroom. That's where part 3 ends. The next section dives into what happened when my family ambushed us at a pediatrician's office, and how it finally pushed us into filing for a restraining order. By the time Sophia was 3 months old, things with my family hadn't calmed down. They had gotten worse. Every time I thought I'd seen the peak of their interference, they found a new way to push past every boundary Ryan and I tried to set. And then came the pediatrician's office incident. It was supposed to be a normal day. Just a routine checkup. Sophia was bundled in her car seat, snoozing peacefully as we drove to the clinic. Ryan had taken the morning off work to come with me. For once, I thought we'd have a calm, ordinary appointment. I should have known better. When we walked into the waiting room, my heart dropped. Sitting there, like they'd been planning it for weeks, were my parents and my Aunt Teresa. They hadn't told me they were coming. They hadn't asked permission. Somehow, they had found out the time and place of Sophia's medical appointment, and they decided to show up. My mom stood as soon as she saw me. She gave this big fake smile and said she wanted to apologize for any misunderstandings. She claimed family was more important than arguments, and that she hoped we could make peace for Sophia's sake. But her eyes told a different story. They weren't warm. They weren't sorry. They were calculating. I held Sophia tighter and told her flatly, "You can't just show up here." We asked for space. My dad jumped in, his voice booming across the waiting room. "We're her grandparents. We have rights. We should be involved in decisions about Sophia's health." Meanwhile, Teresa whipped out her phone and started snapping pictures of Sophia in her car seat. When I told her to stop, she said she just wanted to document her growth. That's when the nurse called us back for the appointment. Relief washed over me, but my parents tried to follow. I turned to the nurse and said, "Only Ryan and I are Sophia's parents. They're not authorized to be here." The nurse was firm. She told my family only parents or guardians could attend unless we provided written consent. My mom's face twisted in anger. She said it was ridiculous that grandparents would be excluded. She bragged that she'd attended appointments for all her other grandchildren, and that I was being cruel for shutting her out. Still, the nurse held the line and asked them to wait in the lobby. Inside the exam room, the pediatrician, Dr. Singh, was his usual calm self. But after checking Sophia, he asked if there had been any changes in our family situation. That's when he told us something that made my stomach flip. He said someone had called the week before, claiming to be Sophia's grandmother. The caller had asked detailed questions about Sophia's weight, her feeding routine, whether there were any concerns about our parenting. Dr. Singh said he hadn't given out any information because of privacy laws, but he documented the call in Sophia's medical record. He told us it was unusual for extended family to make those kinds of calls without the parents' knowledge. I felt sick. Even here, in the one place that was supposed to be safe and private, my family had found a way to insert themselves. They were digging, looking for cracks, anything they could twist into evidence against me. Ryan and I immediately asked Dr. Singh to put a note in Sophia's file. No one except us could access her medical information or make appointments. When we walked back into the lobby, my family was still waiting. My mom immediately demanded to know if Sophia was meeting her milestones. My dad pushed, asking for Sophia's exact weight and height. When I refused, he accused me of hiding something. Teresa chimed in, saying she could tell, just by looking, that Sophia was underfed, that she was too small for her age. The tension was thick. Other families in the waiting room were staring. Sophia started to cry, sensing the stress in the air. I tried to soothe her, but my mom reached out, insisting she knew how to calm babies better than I did. I stepped back, clutching Sophia to my chest. My mom's face crumpled into fake tears. She sobbed about how she dreamed of being a grandma, and how I was robbing her of that joy. Right then, Ryan walked in. He'd been parking the car. He froze when he saw what was happening, then marched straight over. His voice was sharp, firm. "You need to leave. Now." My dad snarled that Ryan was the problem, that before he came along, I'd always respected family traditions. He accused Ryan of turning me against them, of making me selfish and ungrateful. Ryan didn't flinch. He said, "We've asked for space. You've ignored us. If this continues, we'll involve law enforcement." For a moment, the room was dead silent except for Sophia's cries. Then Teresa, still holding her phone, muttered, "We know where you live. We will have a relationship with Eleanor." Eleanor. Not Sophia. It was like they refused to acknowledge who my daughter even was. To them, she wasn't her own person, she was a vessel for their fantasy of honoring Eleanor's legacy. I left that office shaking, my stomach in knots. Ryan was furious. And that night, we called Mr. Alvarez again. When we told him what happened, he didn't hesitate. "Showing up at medical appointments can absolutely be considered harassment," he said, "especially after a cease and desist letter. At this point, you have enough evidence to pursue a temporary restraining order." A restraining order. Against my own parents. It felt surreal. Wrong, even. But at the same time, I knew we were out of options. They weren't listening. They weren't stopping. They were escalating, and if we didn't take action, they'd never stop. So 3 days later, we filed for a restraining order against my mom, my dad, and my Aunt Teresa. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and in the days leading up to it, the pressure from my family only intensified. The night before the hearing, my phone lit up with Liam's name. He sounded conflicted. He said Mom and Dad had asked him to testify on their behalf, to be a character witness. They wanted him to tell the judge how loving they were, how much they adored Sophia. But Liam didn't know what to do. He said they had told him Ryan and I were being unreasonable, that all they wanted was a normal grandparent relationship. He didn't know what to believe anymore, so I told him. I told him everything again. About the false CPS reports, the lies at Ryan's job, the ambush at the hospital, the confrontation at the pediatrician's office. Liam was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "They never told me any of that." I begged him not to take their side in court. He sighed and said he didn't want to be caught in the middle. He wouldn't testify for them, but he wouldn't testify for me either. He said he loved all of us and hoped we could figure it out without lawyers. I hung up the phone, heartbroken. Because I realized my brother wasn't going to save me. This time, it was me and Ryan against everyone else. That's where part 4 ends. The next part will cover the courtroom showdown when we finally faced my parents in front of a judge. The morning of the hearing, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. Sophia was only 4 months old. And instead of enjoying those sweet newborn days, I was preparing to face my own parents in court. Ryan tried to keep me calm. He brewed coffee, double-checked our folder of evidence, and reminded me that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about protecting Sophia, about drawing boundaries that my family refused to respect. But when we arrived at the courthouse and I saw my mom, my dad, and Aunt Teresa sitting together with smug little smiles on their faces, my stomach twisted even tighter. They didn't look nervous. They didn't look ashamed. They looked ready for battle. The judge called us in. We sat on one side of the courtroom with Mr. Alvarez. My family sat on the other with their attorney, a woman named Miss Campbell, who looked like she thrived on drama. The first thing Miss Campbell did was argue that the restraining order was unnecessary. She said my parents were loving grandparents who had been unfairly cut off from their grandchild. She painted me as an emotional, overwhelmed new mother who was misinterpreting their concern as harassment. She even went so far as to say Ryan had isolated me from my family, implying he was controlling me. My blood boiled. Then it was our turn. Mr. Alvarez calmly laid out the facts. He showed the judge the cease and desist letter we had sent weeks earlier. He read aloud the threatening voicemail my mom had left. The one where she said Eleanor would have a relationship with Sophia, whether I liked it or not. He described the hospital incident, how my parents barged into the room, took Sophia without asking, and refused to leave until security escorted them out. Then he brought up the pediatrician ambush. He even had Dr. Singh's written statement about the phone call from someone pretending to be Sophia's grandmother. Piece by piece, he built the case that this wasn't love. It wasn't concern. It was obsession. Harassment. A campaign to undermine me as a mother. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled as I stood. I told the judge about Eleanor. About how my family was trying to force me to name my daughter after a woman who had abused me as a child. I explained how every act of concern was really another attempt to control me, to erase my choices, to turn Sophia into a symbol of Eleanor's legacy. At one point, I had to stop because my voice cracked. I could feel my mom's eyes boring into me across the room, filled with contempt. But then I looked at Sophia, asleep in her carrier beside Ryan, and I found my strength. I told the judge, this isn't about cutting my parents out of my life forever. It's about keeping my daughter safe from manipulation and lies. If they can respect boundaries, then maybe one day, things can be different. But right now, They refuse to accept that Sophia is my child, not Eleanor's second chance. When the judge asked my mom if she had anything to say, she launched into a dramatic speech. She said I was ungrateful, that I was erasing family history, that Eleanor had been a saint who deserved to be remembered. She insisted she was only trying to honor tradition, and accused me of brainwashing my brother against her when I mentioned Eleanor's abuse. Then she turned to the judge and said, "My daughter is unstable. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's exhausted. She's emotional. And her husband is manipulating her." Hearing those words out loud, in court, nearly broke me. My own mother, standing in front of a judge, trying to brand me as unfit. But the judge wasn't fooled. After both sides finished, the judge leaned forward and spoke directly to my parents. He said, "What I see here is not concern. What I see is a pattern of harassment. This young woman has the right to raise her child without interference. And it is not the role of grandparents to dictate names, medical care, or parenting choices." Then he granted us a temporary restraining order. For 6 months, my parents and Teresa were legally barred from contacting me, Ryan, or Sophia. No phone calls, no texts, no surprise visits, no showing up at medical appointments. If they violated the order, they could face fines or even jail time. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a mix of relief and devastation. Relief that we finally had legal protection. Devastation that it had come to this, that I had to put a restraining order on the people who raised me. Ryan squeezed my hand and said, "This is just the beginning. They won't stop that easily." And he was right, because if I thought a restraining order would end the nightmare, I was wrong. It only pushed my family to find new, more creative ways to get to me. That's where part 5 ends. The next chapter will cover how my family tried to twist the restraining order into proof that I was unstable, and how CPS showed up again, this time at our front door. For a few weeks after the restraining order was granted, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The house was quiet. No more surprise visits. No more voicemails or phone calls dripping with guilt. For the first time since Sophia was born, Ryan and I started to feel like normal parents. We took her on walks in the park. We had lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and cartoons. And we finally felt that warm little bubble of peace we had been desperate for. But that bubble didn't last long, because one afternoon, just as I was rocking Sophia to sleep, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. It was a CPS worker. Her name was Miss Daniels. She stood there with a clipboard in her hands, calm but professional. And she told me she was following up on a report that had been made about Sophia's well-being. My legs went weak. I asked what the report said, and she explained that someone had claimed I was neglecting Sophia, that she wasn't being fed properly, that she wasn't gaining weight, and that I was refusing to let extended family check on her. It was like déjà vu. The same lies, the same manipulation, just repackaged. I wanted to slam the door in her face, but I knew I couldn't. I had to cooperate. So I let her in. Miss Daniels walked through the house, taking notes. She checked Sophia's nursery, asked about her feeding schedule, and observed as I changed her diaper. She looked over bottles in the fridge, asked about doctor visits, and wanted to see Sophia's medical records. Thankfully, I had everything organized. Every appointment, every vaccination, every weight check all neatly filed. When Miss Daniels looked over the records, she actually smiled. Sophia was not only healthy, she was thriving. She was in the 50th percentile for weight and height, hitting her milestones right on schedule. Miss Daniels told me, "From what I can see, you're doing a wonderful job." Relief washed over me so strongly that I almost cried. But then she said something that chilled me. She told me this wasn't the first report that had been filed. Apparently, CPS had received multiple anonymous calls in the last month, all with similar claims. That I was mentally unstable. That Ryan was controlling. That Sophia was at risk. Most of them had been screened out before anyone came to the house. But this one had enough detail that it triggered a mandatory check, and though Miss Daniels didn't say it outright, I knew. I knew exactly who was behind those calls. My family. After she left, Ryan came home from work and found me sitting on the couch, shaking. I told him what happened, and his jaw tightened with rage. "This is exactly what Alvarez warned us about," he said. "They're trying to build a record. Even if it's all lies, they're hoping eventually something will stick." He was right. And that's when Ryan suggested we go back to court. Not just to extend the restraining order, but to pursue legal action for harassment and false reporting. The thought of dragging this out in court made me sick. But the thought of CPS knocking on my door again, of maybe one day catching me at my weakest moment, and twisting it into evidence, made me even sicker. We had no choice. But my family wasn't done. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of Sophia. A photo I hadn't taken. She was in her car seat, in our driveway, from an angle that could only have been captured through the bushes. The text read, "Eleanor would be proud. We'll make sure of it." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Someone had been on our property, watching us, watching my daughter. I showed Ryan, and he immediately called the police. An officer came out, took a report, and reviewed our security cameras. But whoever it was had stayed just out of frame. That night, Ryan went to the hardware store and bought more cameras, more locks, even motion sensor lights. Our home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress. And as I lay awake in bed, clutching Sophia against me, one thought ran through my mind over and over. If my family was willing to stalk us, what wouldn't they do? That's where part 6 ends. The next chapter will cover how the harassment escalated into smear campaigns, my parents spreading lies about me to neighbors, co-workers, and even online. After the CPS visit and the terrifying photo text, I thought things couldn't possibly escalate further. But I underestimated just how far my family was willing to go, because soon, it wasn't just CPS or surprise visits. It became a full-blown smear campaign. It started small. Ryan came home from work one evening looking uneasy. He told me that a coworker had pulled him aside and asked if everything was okay at home. Apparently, someone had called HR anonymously, saying Ryan's wife was unstable, and that there were concerns about the baby's well-being. It didn't take a genius to figure out who had made that call. Ryan's boss was supportive thankfully, but Ryan's reputation was on the line. He worked in a field where stability and trust mattered. If these rumors spread, they could damage his career, and that's exactly what my family wanted. Next, it spread to me. I got an email from a former coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. She said she'd received a message claiming I was suffering from severe postpartum depression and couldn't care for Sophia on my own. The email warned her to check in on me before something bad happened. I was humiliated. These weren't just whispers anymore. They were planting seeds of doubt in everyone around me. Neighbors started looking at me differently. At the grocery store, I caught one woman who knew my mom glancing at Sophia in the cart and whispering to her friend. My family wasn't just trying to control me. They were trying to rewrite the narrative of who I was as a mother, as a wife, as a person. They wanted the world to see me as unfit. And if enough people believed it, maybe one day a court would too. The breaking point came when Ryan's mom, Linda, called us in tears. She said she had gotten a phone call from someone pretending to warn her about me. They told her I was spiraling, that Ryan was enabling me, and that Sophia would be better off living with my parents until I got help. Linda didn't believe a word of it. She'd been video chatting with us almost daily, watching Sophia grow, seeing with her own eyes that we were fine. But she was shaken. And that's when I realized, my family wasn't just targeting me. They were trying to isolate us. To make the people closest to us doubt us. Because isolation makes control easier. At that point, Ryan and I sat down with Mr. Alvarez again. We brought every text, every voicemail, every photo, every report. He told us something that gave me both relief and dread. We have enough to pursue a permanent restraining order. And possibly a harassment lawsuit. The relief came from knowing we had options. The dread came from realizing this nightmare wasn't going away anytime soon. It was only getting more entangled with lawyers, judges, and legal fees. Mr. Alvarez explained that false CPS reports, harassment, and stalking could all strengthen our case. But the key was documentation. So Ryan and I doubled down. We kept logs of every interaction, every suspicious call, every rumor we heard secondhand. It felt like we were building a case file against my own parents, and in a way, we were. But here's the part that still haunts me. One evening, as I was feeding Sophia, I scrolled through Facebook. And there it was. A post from my mom. She had uploaded a photo of Eleanor, my grandmother, the woman who tormented me as a child. And in the caption, she wrote, "Rest in peace, Mom. We promise your legacy lives on in little Eleanor. Even if some people try to erase you, we will never stop fighting for you." The comments flooded in. Family, friends, cousins, old neighbors, they all wrote things like, "Stay strong, Margaret. And I know you'll win this battle for your granddaughter." My heart sank. They weren't just twisting the story privately anymore. They were doing it publicly. They were painting me as the villain in my own life. And worst of all, they were erasing Sophia. To them, she wasn't Sophia Grace. She was little Eleanor. A living trophy for a legacy I wanted no part of. That night, as I rocked Sophia to sleep, I whispered into her tiny ear, "You are not Eleanor. You are Sophia Grace. You are mine. And I'll fight anyone who tries to take that from you." That's where part 7 ends. The next chapter will cover the permanent restraining order, hearing, and the shocking things my parents said in front of the judge to try to discredit me. By the time we got to the next court date, I was running on nerves and caffeine. Ryan and I had spent weeks documenting everything, every text, voicemail, CPS visit. And even that terrifying stalker photo of Sophia in our driveway. Mr. Alvarez told us we had a strong case. But as we walked into the courthouse, I couldn't shake the fear. What if the judge didn't believe us? What if my parents managed to twist the story again? When the hearing started, my parents and Teresa sat across the room, calm and collected. My mom wore her grieving saint expression, the same one she always used when talking about Eleanor. My dad sat stiff and upright, his arms crossed like he was the only rational adult in the room. And Teresa looked smug, like she was enjoying the spectacle. Miss Campbell, their lawyer, opened with a polished speech. She painted my parents as devoted grandparents who had been unfairly vilified by their own daughter. She claimed they were being denied a relationship with Sophia for no reason other than hurt feelings over a baby name. Then she turned her focus on me. She said I was paranoid. That I had fabricated abuse memories of Eleanor to justify alienating my family. She implied I was unstable, and that Ryan was manipulating me into cutting ties. Her words were smooth, rehearsed, and infuriating. Then it was our turn. Mr. Alvarez didn't waste time. He presented our evidence like a puzzle being assembled piece by piece until the full picture came into view. He read the cease and desist letter aloud, highlighting how my parents had ignored it. He played the voicemail where my mom said Sophia would be Eleanor, whether you like it or not. He showed the judge the CPS report that was dismissed after the hospital social worker cleared me. Then he handed over Dr. Singh's written statement about the fraudulent call to his office. Finally, he showed the judge the photo text, the one of Sophia taken from our driveway. The courtroom went silent. For the first time, I saw my mom's confident mask falter. When I testified, I didn't hold back. I told the judge about my childhood with Eleanor, the basement punishments, the food deprivation, the cruel words that still echoed in my head when I looked in the mirror. I explained that naming my daughter after her was not an honor. It was re-traumatizing. I told her about the baby shower humiliation, the hospital ambush, the pediatrician showdown, the smear campaign. I said plainly, my parents don't see Sophia as my child. They see her as Eleanor's legacy. And I can't let my daughter grow up being treated like a symbol instead of a person. When it was my mom's turn, she stood and delivered the performance of her life. She sobbed about how much she loved her granddaughter, how she had dreamed of being a grandmother, how she was being cut out of Sophia's life by a cruel, controlling daughter and son-in-law. She denied filing CPS reports despite the overwhelming evidence. She insisted she had never harassed me, only reached out of love. And then she looked straight at me and said, loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "You are not well, Emily. One day you'll thank us for trying to save Sophia from your mistakes." The words cut deep. For a second I almost broke down. But then I looked at Sophia in her stroller beside Ryan, blissfully unaware, and I held myself together. The judge listened carefully, asking a few clarifying questions. She didn't seem swayed by the tears or the theatrics. When both sides finished, she leaned forward with a firm expression. She said, "Grandparents have no right to dictate how a child is raised. What I see here is a consistent pattern of harassment, intimidation, and boundary violations. This is not concern, this is control." And just like that, she granted us a 1-year restraining order. The order barred my parents and Teresa from contacting us directly or indirectly, from showing up at our home or workplaces, from attending Sophia's medical appointments, and from filing false reports to authorities. And then, in a move that stunned me, she ordered them to pay our legal fees. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like one. Because as we walked out of that courthouse, I saw the look on my mom's face. It wasn't defeat, it was determination, and I knew deep down that this wasn't over. That's where part 8 ends. The next part will cover what happened after the restraining order, how my family tried to fight back with a grandparents' visitation lawsuit. For a brief moment after the restraining order was granted, I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would finally back off. The judge had been clear. The order was firm. And for the first few weeks, the silence was almost eerie. No calls, no texts, no uninvited visits. It was like they had vanished. But I should have known better, because instead of stopping, they shifted tactics. 2 weeks later, we got a letter in the mail. It was from another attorney, this time representing my parents. The letter said they were considering filing a grandparents' visitation lawsuit. My stomach dropped. Ryan read the letter out loud, his voice growing sharper with every line. It claimed that my parents had been wrongfully alienated from Sophia's life, that they had a right to be part of her upbringing, and that denying them contact was detrimental to the child's well-being. It was like they were rewriting reality again, as if Sophia even knew them. She was still an infant. The only people she recognized were me, Ryan, and Ryan's sister who had helped during those first chaotic weeks. But to my parents, facts didn't matter. Image did. Control did. We immediately called Mr. Alvarez. He didn't look surprised when we showed him the letter. Instead, He explained calmly that grandparents' rights vary state by state, but in most cases, they're hard to win, unless one parent is dead, absent, or the child has lived with the grandparents before. Your parents don't meet those criteria, he said. They'd have to prove you're unfit. And they've already failed at that once. Relief washed over me for a moment until he added, but that doesn't mean they won't try. And even if they lose, they can still drag you through months of hearings, paperwork, and stress. Exactly what they wanted. The lawsuit came a week later. Reading through the papers, I felt like I was reading about a stranger. According to my parents, I was unstable, paranoid, and isolating Sophia from her loving extended family. They described Ryan as manipulative and controlling, claiming he had cut me off from everyone who cared about me. They even wrote that Eleanor, my grandmother, had been the glue of the family, and that naming Sophia after her would have created a bond of tradition and stability. It was surreal. Like they were building their case on lies stacked so high they were starting to believe them. When Ryan saw how shaken I was, he reminded me of something important. This isn't about them, it's about Sophia. And as long as we keep her safe, that's all that matters. So we prepared. Mr. Alvarez gathered every piece of documentation we had: CPS reports, voicemails, texts, photos, statements from the pediatrician, and the hospital social worker. He said it was more than enough to show a clear pattern of harassment and boundary violations. Still, I couldn't shake the fear. Courtrooms were unpredictable. What if the judge sympathized with them? What if they twisted things just right? The first hearing was scheduled for early spring. Walking into that courtroom again, I felt like I was stuck in a loop. Same people, same tension, same feeling of being judged, not just as a mother, but as a person. My parents sat across from me, perfectly composed. My mom clutched a photo of Eleanor like it was a holy relic. My dad looked righteous, like he was fighting some noble battle. Teresa wasn't listed on the lawsuit, but she was there too, sitting behind them, nodding along like a cheerleader. And when the judge called the case, I knew this was going to be another fight for my daughter's future. That's where part 9 ends. The next chapter will dive into the visitation trial itself, the testimonies, the accusations, and the moment the judge made a decision that shocked everyone in the room. The courtroom felt heavier this time. Unlike the restraining order hearing, this wasn't just about stopping harassment, it was about my parents trying to wedge themselves legally into Sophia's life. And if they won, it would mean court-ordered visitation. It would mean handing over my baby to the very people who had traumatized me. Their lawyer started strong. She painted my parents as warm, devoted grandparents who had been unfairly cut off from their granddaughter. She said I was unreasonably hostile, and that Ryan was controlling, manipulating me into shutting out my entire family. Then she leaned into sentimentality. She held up that same photo of Eleanor and told the judge, "This family has a proud tradition. To deny Margaret and Charles a role in their granddaughter's life is to erase generations of love and history." I felt sick. They were using Eleanor's name like a weapon, like her memory was more important than the actual living child in question. When it was my turn, I told the truth. I explained how Eleanor wasn't a saint, how she had locked me in a basement pantry for hours, withheld food, and filled my childhood with cruel words that still haunted me. I described how my parents ignored those experiences and tried to force her name onto my daughter, even after I said no. And then I recounted every incident since Sophia's birth. The hospital ambush, the pediatrician confrontation, the false CPS reports, the smear campaign, the stalker photo text. Each piece of evidence was laid out carefully by Mr. Alvarez, showing the judge this wasn't about love or family. It was about control. The most powerful testimony came from Ryan. He spoke calmly, firmly, and without anger. He described how he'd watched me stand up against years of pressure, how I'd cared for Sophia day and night, and how my parents had crossed every boundary imaginable. Then he looked at the judge and said, "We're not trying to cut them out for no reason. We're protecting our daughter. And if you were in our shoes, I think you'd do the same." For the first time, I saw the judge soften. My parents testified too, of course. My mom cried on cue, saying she prayed every night for little Eleanor. My dad talked about family values and accused Ryan of poisoning me against them. At one point, my mom actually said, "Emily doesn't know what's best for her own child. She's too emotional." The judge's eyebrows shot up. That was the moment I knew their mask was slipping. After closing arguments, the courtroom fell silent. The judge shuffled papers, took a long pause, then delivered her decision. She denied the visitation request. But she didn't stop there. She called their lawsuit frivolous and an abuse of the legal system. She said their behavior showed a pattern of harassment, not love. And then she ordered them to pay additional legal costs for wasting the court's time. It was a slam, a complete rejection of their narrative. Walking out of that courtroom, I should have felt victorious. But instead, I felt hollow. Because even though we'd won again, I knew my parents weren't finished. People who are obsessed with control don't just stop when the law tells them no. And deep down, I could feel the storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength. That's where part 10 ends. The next chapter will cover the aftermath of the lawsuit, how my family lashed out in new ways, and how it all pushed me to finally make a decision I never thought I'd have to make. After the judge denied their visitation lawsuit, I thought my parents might finally give up. They'd lost twice now, once with the restraining order, and now with the visitation case. But instead of retreating, they lashed out. The first sign was online. My mom posted another tribute to Eleanor. But this time, it wasn't just sentimental. It was pointed. She wrote, "Some people forget where they come from. Some people turn their backs on family. But the truth always comes out. We will not be silenced. Eleanor's spirit lives on in her great-granddaughter, no matter what lies are told." The comments were filled with sympathy for her. Friends and relatives wrote things like, "Stay strong, Margaret, she'll come around. And don't give up on your granddaughter." Reading those words made my stomach twist. My family wasn't just ignoring my boundaries, they were actively rewriting history for the whole world to see. Then came the phone calls. Not to me this time, but to people in my orbit. Ryan's boss got another anonymous tip about his unstable home life. My old coworkers got emails claiming I had isolated myself and was unfit to parent. Even our pediatrician's office got another suspicious call asking for details about Sophia's health. It was like a coordinated campaign to keep us under pressure, to make us feel like eyes were always on us. But the worst part was the mail. One afternoon, I found an envelope in our mailbox with no return address. Inside was a printed photo of Sophia taken at the park a few days earlier. She was sitting in her stroller, smiling, completely innocent. And on the bottom of the photo, scrawled in pen, were the words, "Little Eleanor belongs with us." I dropped the photo like it burned. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. That wasn't just harassment anymore. That was a threat. We called Mr. Alvarez immediately. When he saw the photo, his face darkened. He told us this had escalated beyond family court. This was now potentially criminal harassment and stalking. He urged us to file a police report, which we did the very next morning. The officer who took our statement was sympathetic but cautious. He explained that without proof of who sent the photo, it would be difficult to press charges. Still, they opened a case and advised us to install security cameras around our home. So we did. Every corner of the house, inside and out. I hated that it had come to this, that I felt like I had to protect my baby from my own family. That night, as I watched Sophia sleep peacefully, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this forever. No more waiting for the next call, the next letter, the next ambush. If my family wanted to keep pushing, I would push back harder. And that meant going beyond defense. It meant going on the offensive. That's where part 11 ends. The next chapter will cover how I prepared for a full custody protection case and potential criminal charges. And the moment I finally confronted the possibility of cutting ties with my family permanently. After that photo showed up in our mailbox, something inside me snapped. Up until then, I had been trying to survive, reacting to each ambush, each false report, each attempt to wedge themselves into Sophia's life. But now I realized, survival wasn't enough. If I wanted peace, if I wanted safety, I had to take control. Mr. Alvarez agreed. He told us that what we were dealing with had escalated far beyond a family dispute. It was harassment, stalking, defamation. And if we wanted it to stop, we needed to hit back legally and hard. He outlined 3 steps. 1. File a criminal complaint for harassment and stalking, based on the threatening photo. 2. Seek a permanent restraining order that could last years, not just one. 3. Prepare a defamation case. Since my parents' smear campaign had already impacted Ryan's job and my reputation, it sounded overwhelming, terrifying, even. But also, freeing. For the first time, we weren't just defending ourselves, we were building a case against them. The police started their investigation, but as expected, progress was slow. The photo had been printed on standard paper, mailed locally, and showed no fingerprints. Still, combined with the ongoing harassment, it created a paper trail that was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Mr. Alvarez filed motions for the permanent restraining order. This time, instead of 6 months or a year, we were asking for 5 years minimum. And when we sat in his office preparing our statements, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Because this wasn't about arguing over baby names anymore. This was about drawing a line in the sand. At home, Ryan and I tried to hold on to normal life. We read Sophia bedtime stories. We went on stroller walks. We even laughed sometimes, like a real family should. But the tension was always there, humming under the surface. Every time the phone rang, I flinched. Every time a car slowed down in front of our house, my chest tightened. Every time I scrolled social media, I braced myself for another passive-aggressive post from my mom. It was exhausting. Then came the call that changed everything. Mr. Alvarez had been reviewing new discovery materials when he found something explosive, a recorded voicemail my parents had left for one of my cousins. In it, my mom said, "If Emily won't honor Eleanor, then we'll make sure the courts take Sophia from her. She's not fit to raise a child anyway." That voicemail was a smoking gun. Proof, not just suspicion, that their campaign wasn't about love. It was about control, and we were going to use it. As the next court date approached, I looked at Sophia sleeping in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling, and I whispered a promise to her. "No matter what it takes, I will protect you. You will never grow up in fear the way I did. Never." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed myself. That's where part 12 ends. The next chapter will cover the court battle for the permanent restraining order, including the moment that voicemail was played in front of the judge, and how it changed everything. The day of the hearing felt different from the ones before. This wasn't about temporary fixes anymore. This was about long-term protection for me, for Ryan, and most importantly, for Sophia. When we walked into the courtroom, I could feel my parents' eyes on me. My mother clutched a rosary in one hand and a framed photo of Eleanor in the other, as if props could disguise the truth. My father sat stiffly, jaw tight, like a man who still believed he was in control, but they didn't know what was coming. Mr. Alvarez opened with a simple statement. "This case isn't about family traditions. It isn't about names. It's about a clear, documented pattern of harassment, intimidation, and attempted coercion against my client and her child." Then he started laying out the evidence. The false CPS reports, the pediatrician ambush, the hospital intrusion, the smear campaigns, the stalker photo with the message, "Little Eleanor belongs with us." And finally he played the voicemail. The words echoed through the courtroom. "If Emily won't honor Eleanor, then we'll make sure the courts take Sophia from her. She's not fit to raise a child anyway." You could hear the malice, the entitlement, the intent. My mother's face went pale. My father shifted in his chair, suddenly less confident. For once, they couldn't hide behind tears or tradition. Their own voices had betrayed them. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke calmly, but firmly. I told the judge about the years of emotional abuse I'd endured as a child, about the suffocating pressure during my pregnancy, about how even now, as a mother, I was being undermined and stalked by the very people who claimed to love me. And then I looked at Sophia, who was sitting quietly in her stroller beside Ryan, and I said, "All I want is to raise my daughter in peace, to give her the childhood I never had. But I can't do that if my family is allowed to keep harassing us. I need this order. Not for me, for her." My voice cracked, but I didn't look away. The judge leaned back, thoughtful. Then she spoke. She said the evidence was overwhelming. That the behavior wasn't normal family conflict, it was harassment. That my parents had crossed lines no grandparents should ever cross. And then she granted the 5-year restraining order. Not only that, she expanded it. It applied to my parents, my Aunt Teresa, and anyone acting on their behalf. It barred them from contacting me, Ryan, or Sophia in any way, directly, indirectly, in person, online, through relatives, through work, through medical providers. If they tried again, it wouldn't be a family court issue, it would be criminal. The gavel fell, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But even as relief washed over me, I knew this wasn't the end. Because people like my parents didn't just stop when they lost, they found new ways to fight, and part of me feared the worst was still coming. That's where part 13 ends. The next chapter will cover the final escalation, how my parents tried one last desperate move that nearly shattered everything, and how I made the hardest decision of my life. For a few weeks after the 5-year restraining order, life finally felt quiet. No surprise visits, no phone calls at midnight, no cryptic letters in the mail. I started to believe maybe, just maybe, it was over. But people like my parents don't fade quietly. They escalate. It started with whispers. A cousin messaged me on Facebook saying my mom had been venting at a family barbecue. According to her, my parents were telling everyone I'd brainwashed myself, that Ryan was controlling me, and that Sophia was being raised in isolation. At first, I brushed it off. Smear campaigns weren't new. But then I got an email from CPS. Another report. This time, it claimed Sophia was dangerously underweight, and that I was refusing medical care. The kicker? The report was anonymous, but the language was almost identical to things my mom had said at past doctor visits. When the CPS worker showed up at my door, I thought I was going to collapse. She was polite, professional, but the implication was crushing. Another stranger walking through my home, judging my parenting, peeking into Sophia's room, making notes. Sophia was fine. More than fine, she was thriving. The worker even said so. But the damage was done. Every time CPS showed up, it planted a seed of doubt. Not in me but in the system. Because one day, if enough reports piled up, Someone might take them seriously, and that was my parents' endgame. Death by 1,000 cuts. Ryan and I met with Mr. Alvarez again. He was furious. He said filing false reports after a restraining order wasn't just harassment, it was contempt of court. Potentially jail-worthy. He advised us to press charges, but that meant going all in. No more hoping they'd stop. No more second chances. It meant cutting the cord completely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by Sophia's crib, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, and thought about the family I'd grown up with. The holidays. The birthdays. The illusion of love that had always come with strings attached. And I realized, clinging to that illusion was the only thing keeping me chained to them, so I let it go. For Sophia. For me. The next morning, I called Mr. Alvarez and told him, yes. File the charges. He's proof down it sterile to perpecedent. That's where part 14 ends. The next chapter will cover the criminal case for contempt and harassment, the moment everything finally broke wide open. And the choice I had to make about whether to ever see my parents again. Filing those charges felt like stepping off a cliff. For years, I'd been conditioned to believe that no matter what my parents did, family was family. That speaking out, or worse, fighting back, made me the traitor. But once Mr. Alvarez filed the contempt motion, there was no turning back. This time, it wasn't family court. It was criminal court. The hearing was short, but brutal. The prosecutor laid out the pattern. Repeated false CPS reports. The stalker photo. The voicemail about taking Sophia. And now, brand new evidence that they'd been calling CPS again after the restraining order. Then the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood, legs shaking, and said, Your Honor, I don't want vengeance. I don't want to destroy my parents. I just want them to leave me and my daughter alone. But every time I try to move on, they drag us back into their chaos. If this court doesn't stop them, I don't know if they ever will. The room was silent. When it was my parents' turn, my mother cried. She said she was just worried for Sophia. That I was too fragile to be a mother. That Ryan was isolating me. My father backed her up, insisting their actions came from love, but the judge wasn't buying it. She slammed her gavel and declared their behavior a willful violation of the restraining order. Sentence: 90 days in jail, suspended to 30 with probation on the condition that they cease all contact with me, Ryan, or Sophia. If they so much as sent a text, they'd go back behind bars. Walking out of that courtroom, I should have felt victorious. But instead, I felt hollow. Because no matter how many legal wins I stacked up, I had lost something bigger. The dream of ever having parents who loved me without conditions. And as much as I hated them for what they did, part of me still grieved that loss. That night, I held Sophia close and whispered, You will never know that kind of love, the kind that hurts more than it heals. You will only know safety. You will only know peace. And for the first time, I started to believe I could actually keep that promise. That's where part 15 ends. The next chapter will be the final part, part 16, where I share the aftermath, how life looks now, and the ultimate decision I made about cutting ties with my family forever. It's been months since that last court hearing. Months since my parents sat in front of a judge and were told, in no uncertain terms, to stay away from me and my daughter. And in that time, something unexpected happened. Silence. No more calls, no more reports, no more strangers showing up at my door. Just silence. At first, the quiet was unsettling. I kept waiting for the next shoe to drop. The next scheme. The next ambush. But slowly, I realized something. They were gone. Not because they chose to stop. But because the law had finally made them. And in that space, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Life looks different now. Ryan and I moved to a new home in a different part of town. A place where we could start fresh. We installed cameras. Not because we expect trouble, but because it helps me sleep at night. Sophia is thriving, laughing, crawling, babbling her first words. Every milestone reminds me why I fought so hard. And every time I hear her giggle, it drowns out the echoes of my mother's voice, my grandmother's cruelty, the generational chains I finally broke. Sometimes, I wonder if I'll ever see my parents again. If one day, years from now, they'll try to come back into my life with apologies and promises, but I've already made my choice. Forgiveness, maybe. Forgetting, never. And reconciliation? Only if it's safe for me, for Ryan, and for Sophia. Until then, the door stays closed. This story started with a baby name. Something so small, so innocent, but what it revealed was everything toxic hiding underneath the control. The manipulation. The obsession with tradition over love. And while I can't change the family I was born into, I can change the family I build. A family where love has no strings. Where names are chosen with joy, not fear. Where my daughter grows up knowing she is enough exactly as she is. So if you've ever been caught between loyalty to family and loyalty to yourself, hear this. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not ungrateful for choosing safety. And you are not wrong for walking away from people who refuse to respect your boundaries. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is break free. And that's the end of this 16-part story. Do you want me to now create a condensed version, like a one-part outline or summary, of the entire series? So you have a quick reference for your YouTube video planning?